The biggest double game week of the season is upon us, and I'm here on a free hit, ready to get locked in for game week 34. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to take a look at my free hit team selection almost for game week 34. Not quite locked in yet, obviously injuries could occur in the midweek, but I wanted to get this content out to you as quickly as possible because I am pretty close now to locking this in, barring any injuries. In the meantime, though, let's take a quick look and a reminder at my Game Week 33 performance. And luckily, I ended on a bit of a high note on Monday night with that triple Chelsea coming in clutch. The double clean sheet, the first time I've experienced it as a double Chelsea defensive asset owner, was very, very handy. And that is what turned my grey arrow into a pretty sizable green arrow of about 25k. Obviously, not massive hauls in isolation, but the combination really helped me out there. And it was a nice relief because they were becoming a little bit frustrating, to say the least. Moving into midfield, Cole Palmer was the only one that got any points of note whatsoever, and he did perform beyond what any of us even imagined. There were a few people out there captaining him, and fair play if you did, but realistically, I think he was on the more differential side of the captaincy, as we saw in the numbers anyway, and I think it would have taken a pretty big gambler to bet on the fact he'd score 4 goals at home to Everton. He's been phenomenal this season, and we're really now starting to stand up and take notice of him as what it should be basically a premium asset at this point. He's got 30 attacking returns, I believe in 23, maybe 24 starts. So this is a guy putting up elite numbers on penalties in a decent enough attack. So captaincy will probably be in consideration for him most weeks, or at least the weeks between now and the end of the season, barring game week 34, probably. Moving into the forward line, and Isak was the player that really stood out for me this week. 12 points, 2 goals. I think it was 2 bonus points in the end as well. So again, a very decent haul from him. He's been brilliant for me on the wild card ever since game week 30. Really glad I took the risk on his injury doubts and the fact that he keeps getting injured, and just put him in my side from the off. And luckily, it's paid off. So very, very happy with that. And as long as he stays fit, he'll be fantastic come game week 37 and the bench boost. Erling Haaland was my captain, 10 points from him. Obviously, assist, fairly fortuitous. And then the penalty goal as well. Absolutely fine with 10 points. And going into Monday night, I would have absolutely been okay with that. It was a little bit frustrating seeing Cole Palmer smash that score to pieces, but realistically speaking, I was never really going to put the armband on him. Now, one quick note, and it feels like a lifetime ago now, and I guess maybe because I'm on a green arrow, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I did bring in Phil Foden as a very last-minute move for Bukayo Saka. Now, I did that based on the leak on Twitter about 20 minutes before the deadline, and usually the accounts are very, very reliable, so I don't want to dig them out whatsoever, and I took that risk. But obviously what actually then happened is that Pep seems to be onto us a little bit in the community. He's trying to terminate the links, and the leaks rather, so that we probably don't have reliable info coming out prior to the deadline and giving away his starting lineup, basically, which makes perfect sense. All of that meant that Phil Foden was a bit of a decoy. That leak was a decoy, and he didn't play any minutes whatsoever. Now, I am very thankful of that, because what that means is, despite the fact I sold Saka luckily didn't get any attacking returns. Foden didn't get a minute. So Garnacho came off my bench for 4 points, and that actually left me 2 points up on the transfer without him even playing the match, which again is bizarre fortune. And I do count myself extremely lucky to have gotten away with that. But I guess, fingers crossed, fortune favours the brave perhaps on this particular occasion. I also went with João Pedro as well over Højlund as well. So that was a bit of a last minute call. I was very 50-50, as you probably guessed from my team selection video last week. But I did go with João Pedro because my gut was just telling me he's the more exciting pick. And at a cheaper price on penalties, it enables other moves elsewhere later on down the line, which I'll go on to explain when we get to game week 35 and beyond. In the meantime, though, green arrow, very happy. Let's move on to my team selection on the free hit for game week 34. So taking a look at the defensive line and the goalkeepers on my free hit so far, and this is actually one of the positions where I could go one of a few ways at this point. I'm definitely not quite locked in yet, but I think I'm getting pretty close. So to start off with the goalkeepers, I do like Dean Henderson. Now, he's not the perfect goalkeeper. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier on this week, he's actually only kept 1 clean sheet so far this season in 12 appearances, but he is a bit of a saves machine generally, and I do fancy him for a double home fixture in the double game week. So West Ham at home, I think, is a decent enough chance of a clean sheet. Jarrod Bowen might also be out for that, by the way, so interesting to keep an eye on that. And then, yes, Newcastle are almost certain to score against them, but it is worth noting that Crystal Palace's defensive numbers are actually not that bad at all. They're upper mid-table. So again, 2 home fixtures, I'm not too worried about it. And looking around at the other keepers as options, I don't think too many of them I could guarantee to outscore him or have a better chance in any given single game in the double to get a clean sheet than that West Ham home game. So it's a bit of a chance that I'm taking there, but at 4.4 million, he's pretty affordable and I don't mind taking that risk. It also covers off the Crystal Palace defence, which I'll go on to explain other combinations that I could use to do so in just a moment's time. On the bench, Pickford, I don't really expect to be starting him at this point. Maybe prior to the Chelsea game, I would have been more tempted to start him, but Everton did look a little bit all at sea. Yes, it's 2 home fixtures, but one of them is against Liverpool. I think you can almost guarantee that not to be a clean sheet, although you probably would have said the same about Palace last week against Liverpool, so things can happen. But Nottingham Forest as well are going to be fighting for their lives near the bottom of the table. And again, I think that will be a bit of a ding-dong between Everton and Forest, and I can see goals in that game. So I'm trying to match up the actual fixtures with what I believe to actually happen in the games or what I'm predicting to happen. And I just fancy that West Ham home game for the clean sheet and then possibly saves in the second half of the double game week against Newcastle. Now, moving into the defensive line, and I wanted to look at all of this in tandem because there are different combinations I could pick. But currently, I am going to be going for double Arsenal defence. Now, I don't think it's the perfect week to have double Arsenal defence because Wolves away, Chelsea at home. I think it is likely Chelsea score, and Wolves away from home. Okay, Wolves aren't the most potent attack in the league or in the world, but they are good enough in front of goal that I think they are going to pose challenges. And I don't know the result of the Arsenal Bayern game at the moment, but I can bet pretty good money that they're going to be pretty tired after it on the Wednesday night. And going into Wolves away from home is going to be fairly psychologically tough. So that all means that maybe the clean sheet odds aren't as high as they might normally be for Arsenal defenders, but their defence is so rock solid. I think it's 0.63 XGC per 90 since Raya stepped in at the very least. So it's very, very low on the defensive numbers, which is ideal for double Arsenal defence. And honestly, looking around at other defences I could be targeting, I really am struggling to pick out clean sheets in this double. So I think on balance of probabilities, I quite like going double Arsenal defence for that reason, just because they are the safest bet for clean sheets. And both Saliba and, more importantly, Gabriel also do carry pretty substantial goal threat from set pieces. So you never know. You might get lucky with a bit of attacking upside there as well. Now, there is, of course, an argument to go double Arsenal attack instead, but I think there's maybe slightly more doubt about which that second Arsenal attacker might be. You could look at Ødegaard, who is starting tonight but had a bit of an injury doubt going into the Wednesday night fixture. And then Havertz as well. Yes, he's been very, very important. I would expect him to get good minutes in the double, but can I expect him to get 90 minutes in both matches? I'm going to say probably not. Whether or not that 60, 70 minutes of either of those players in both of the matches outweighs the double Arsenal defence or one of the Arsenal defenders is another debate altogether. But I think the drop-off from one Arsenal defender, or the second Arsenal defender rather, to any of the other defenders is larger than the drop-off from one of the Arsenal midfielders to some of the other options from other teams that I can incorporate in this side. And it's for that reason and that reason alone that I'm going with double Arsenal defence as it stands. Now, I did mention combinations a minute ago. So one other combination that I'd like to keep in mind, and again for you guys to keep in mind as well, is switching the Palace and the second Arsenal defender. So what I would do there is if I felt that Munoz, for instance, and it probably would be Munoz in this instance, was good enough for attacking upside against two of the weakest defences in the league, West Ham and Newcastle. I think they're 16th and 17th for XGC per 90 this season. If I swap them over So I had Munoz instead of Saliba, but I still kept the Arsenal double clean sheet, the double defence, by having Raya in goal, who again should be absolutely nailed, 90 minutes in both matches, you would think. No upside for Raya, but arguably more upside for Munoz. So it's whether or not that outweighs this combination of Henderson and Saliba. As it stands, as you can probably assume, I'm going with Henderson and Saliba. I think that's just the more comfortable combination for me at this present moment, but don't be massively surprised if I do switch it, and of course I will let you all know on Twitter at FPL Pricey if I do so. Now, moving on to Liverpool defence, and I do want to cover off one Liverpool defender because Fulham and Everton, although it is both away from home, I do actually quite like for clean sheets, and they're no slouches at the back either. They are third for the XGC per 90, so it is a big drop-off, by the way, from Arsenal. I think it's almost double the XGC than Liverpool, half the XGC than Liverpool. But they are still a decent defence, even if at times they do look a little bit shaky. And Van Dijk isn't only representing the clean sheet potential, but a bit like Gabriel, a bit like Saliba to a lesser extent, he also has significant aerial threat from set pieces. And I do have fond memories of him in double game weeks in seasons past. Now, that Van Dijk slot, if you've got a bit more money in the bank, I've only got 0.1, could be a Trent if you want to push it that little bit higher, but also take the risk on minutes. And I think that is the risk really for Trent. It's whether or not you back him to start both matches when it's 4 away games in 10 days, I believe. And Gomez could easily step in considering Trent's been out for a little while. Even without Connor Bradley, I think there's still enough risk there that I might not be that tempted to do it. Or you could go with Robertson. Now, Robertson, I do really like, and I think he probably does start both of the matches, but I think he might get early substitutions in one of the two, maybe even both, because Tsimikas, whilst he's not been anywhere near the level of Robertson, is still a fairly decent alternative that Klopp can use if it looks like Robertson is looking a little bit leggy, because again, it's 4 games in 10 days. They're all away from home, I believe, so it could happen. And Van Dijk is just such a guarantee of minutes, especially whilst they're pressing for the league at the moment. I'd be very, very surprised if they rotated him out for a rest in the league. Whereas with Robertson, I'd still be surprised, but maybe less surprised, if that makes sense. Now, I have been on the defenders for a little while, but one quick thing before I wrap up. Another combination I could look at doing is Munoz again, but Alisson in goal rather than Henderson. And that actually does save me a bit of money because Van Dijk is obviously more expensive than Alisson is, but the drop-off between Henderson and Munoz is only 0.1 million. So I could save a bit of money if I wanted to do something else by transferring those across. And I've still got the Liverpool clean sheet. I've still got the Crystal Palace clean sheet. And again, it's arguable whether or not it's more attacking potential from Munoz or Van Dijk. Again, it's on screen as this because this is the route I prefer at this moment in time. I do think there are merits to switching it the other way. So let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with that strategy. On the bench, I've got 2 other defenders, of course, you have to. Ait-Nouri is the first of the 2. Now, the reason it's Ait-Nouri and not Munoz at the moment is because I have 2 other Crystal Palace players. A little bit of a spoiler for later, by the way. But I've got 2 other Crystal Palace players, so I can't actually have Munoz as another, making it 4 Crystal Palace players. Now, Ait-Nouri is a bit of an injury doubt. Hopefully we get positive news on him in the press conferences. And realistically speaking, I do want to start him if he's fit, but Arsenal at home isn't a fantastic fixture. And despite the attacking upside of Ait-Nouri, I've been a little bit put off by 1, the injury doubt, 2, the first fixture, and 3, the fact that Hwang Hee-chan is now back. And it looks likely that Ait-Nouri is going to recede back into a more traditional left wing back role rather than left wing where he's been playing recently and catching the eye. That doesn't make him a bad pick, and if you've got him at the moment, I think absolutely go with him and play him. But for me, I think there's enough going against him that I would personally go without him on a free hit without any sort of positive confirmation on the injury news at the very, very least. Now, Mykolenko is very much a last substitute here. I do quite like the attacking upside. I think it's 0.1 XGI per 90. Not fantastic, of course, but I don't really expect him to be starting. He's a cheap defender that I can have in my side in case lightning strikes and 2 of my defenders get taken down and I need to rely on him. It's very, very unlikely, but I don't mind the coverage. And of course, I haven't got an Everton triple up, so I can afford to just put him there. third on the bench. If there are any other options that you like in defence, please do let me know in the comments below. And let's move on before we get to the midfielders towards the captaincy debate, because all three of my favourites are actually in midfield this week. Okay, so a quick section on the Game Week 34 captaincy now before I move on with my free hit side, and that is mainly because all three of my favourites are midfielders, and I do think it comes down to one of these three realistically. There are going to be other differential alternatives. You could look at Solanke, you could look at Darwin, Trent, Van Dijk, maybe even Elise, but I think realistically most managers are probably going to settle on one of these three, and I don't want to waste 10 minutes going through every single little differential. If you're going to go for one, you know what you're doing. You know it's a risk, but you also know that there's upside there, and I imagine you're going to do the research on that as well. So by all means, go for it. But I think for me personally, these are the favourite three options in my side, and because I'm on a free hit, I've got any of these three to pick from. So again, spoilers for the midfield section. If I think they're all good captaincy options, they're obviously going to be in my midfield. So I probably won't discuss them too much in just a moment's time. However, we'll start from the top. Bukayo Saka. Now, he is playing as we speak, so I will have to maybe asterisk this video if he goes down injured or comes off on the 60th minute and the situation changes. But as it stands right now, if there's no injury that occurs in the midweek, I back him to start both of these fixtures. Yes, there are going to be people saying he has looked a bit leggy. He has looked maybe like he's carrying a bit of a knock, which I think is true. But his data is still fantastic. Even against Aston Villa, he had several good chances and he's still getting into the good areas. And it's not like he's walking wounded. Like, he is still competing in the matches. He's not hobbling around. He's just getting a little knock here, little knock there, and Arteta is playing him through. Now, again, Wolves and Chelsea, whilst from a defensive point of view might not be the ideal fixtures, from attacking, if you know that a player is going to start both matches and probably get 80 plus minutes in both, I think there are goals in both of them. And honestly, if I could back any of the other Arsenal midfielders to definitely be getting 80 plus minutes in both matches, I'd be more tempted to go for the Arsenal double up in midfield. However, as it is, I'm not that convinced. So Saka is probably the one for me. Now, with Saka, obviously, he's got the benefit of penalties as well. And as we can see here, he's already nearly at the 200-point mark. He's got 24 attacking returns this season already as well. So he is a phenomenal pick, even if he's not been in razor-sharp form recently. I think all it would have taken is one attacking return. I think one went just wide of the post against Aston Villa, for instance. If that went in, or he got a random penalty in the last couple of game weeks, we'd probably all be talking about him a lot more. In fact, he did get a random penalty in game week 32, I believe. So maybe we should be talking about him a bit more as a captaincy option. As it is, though, I think he's probably my second favourite. And my first favourite would undoubtedly be Mo Salah. Now, best data, most attacking returns, not the most points, interestingly enough, but I think for attacking returns this week, Fulham and Everton both represent a decent opportunity for Salah. And yes, okay, he hasn't played his best recently. He's been a bit wasteful in front of goal, not been looking razor sharp, but the data is still fantastic. It's still over 1 XGI per 90. And as long as he's getting the chances, I think it is only a matter of time before he starts burying a few of them. He's not just dropped off as a player in the last 2 months. Even if he's not been at his best, even him at 90% is still better than most. And I back him to get back to 100% very, very soon. The other thing with Salah is, of course, that more so than other Liverpool attackers, I back his minutes really high. So I think he'll get very close to 160, 170 minutes in the double game week. And that, for me, on a player as good with the track record of Mo Salah on penalties, is good enough for the armband, in my personal opinion. Now, if you didn't want to go with one of probably the two most popular options in Saka or Salah, I would offer up Eberechi Eze as the next best differential option as a captaincy. Now, I think with him, he's not going to be a differential in isolation. I think a lot of managers are going to buy him, especially on a free hit. I think he'll be very, very popular. But I don't think too many are going to captain him. And West Ham and Newcastle at home, as I mentioned earlier, two of the worst defences in the league this season, both playing away from home at Selhurst Park. I do fancy a few attacking returns for Palace here. And again, Eze on penalties, good data, not quite at the same level of the other two. But when he's on the pitch, he's looked really, really sharp. And especially with Elise back fit and firing, Eze does raise his game with Elise on the pitch as well. So I really don't hate it as a differential option. And if you're chasing rank a little bit, I would say this is actually maybe a good opportunity to go differential with Eze. It's not as much of a drop-off as maybe a Solanke, in my personal opinion. And because of the fixtures, the fact he's on penalties, and Palace are looking pretty decent at the moment as well, I think there's enough going against Saka and Salah that if you weren't massively convinced by the arguments I put across just now, Eze isn't that far off in my opinion, and I think you could go for him if you wanted to chase rank and if you wanted to do something a bit differential. As it is though, I'm going with Salah captain unless we get some sort of injury in the Europa League in midweek, and Saka for me would be the second favourite. Eze just misses out for me as well, but like I said, if you want to go differential, I would offer Eze up as a good option. So into the midfield, and as you can see, I've put the armband on Mo Salah, Saka gets the vice, and Eze is obviously in the team too. So we probably don't need to talk about them anymore. If you've skipped ahead to this section, I discussed each of those three and their individual merits in the captaincy section just a second ago. So do feel free to rewind and check that out if you want me to talk about that at length. In the meantime, though, it's a story of two Diazes, and I really do like both of them now. I've kind of gone back on my opinion earlier this week on Brereton Diaz. I'll discuss him in a moment's time, but we'll start off with Luis Diaz. Now, Luis Diaz for me is maybe not the perfect option, and I think you can probably go against him, but I think of the Liverpool attackers, and I do want two, one is going to be Mo Salah, and then the other one is one of Diaz, maybe McAllister for minutes as an outside differential option, but I think he's going to be sitting in the 6 again rather than the 8, and therefore attacking potential isn't as good as it has been. Or you could go with Darwin up top, or of course Jota. Now, very, very outside shout on Gakpo, but I don't think we need to discuss him too much. I don't expect the minutes to be fantastic. And Darwin and Jota, I think you have to talk about them in tandem at this point. Now, Darwin has been first choice for the majority of the season, but it is also worth noting that he's taken those opportunities when Jota has been out of the starting 11 with injuries. So we haven't seen a great deal of football where both of them have been fit at the same time, and how Klopp would manipulate the side to incorporate them both whilst Luis Diaz is in good form. Because at earlier points in the season, Diaz probably wasn't in the best form, and Klopp could find other solutions to incorporate them all. Now, at this moment in time, Darwin's the one that's maybe not been firing at all cylinders, and a lot of Liverpool fans that I'm seeing are talking about Darwin potentially getting rotated for Jota to just freshen up the side a little bit, I guess. And also Jota, whether or not this is just one of those sort of myths, I kind of do go along with it though, that he is a good finisher. When he's in front of goal, I back him more often than not to find the back of the net. And I think most of us probably couldn't say the same about Darwin. The data for Darwin is much better, but I think if I'm going to be picking Darwin on my free hit, I'd need to be pretty confident of his minutes being 130, 140 plus for me to take that punt and take that leap that over those minutes he does finish a couple of his chances. Whereas with Diaz, I don't think that I'm as worried on that. And as I mentioned, I think maybe a couple of weeks ago, Diaz does seem to be a player that is now finding himself in more central areas in the final third, whereas earlier on in the season, I think he was being forced out wide a little bit, taking on his man around the outside, whereas now he's drifting inside of that right back and finding himself in more central areas in front of goal. And I think that bodes well for the double game week away at Fulham and Everton. It's those crucial split-second moments where they turn over possession and they switch the wings, they switch the play, that Diaz or Salah could benefit from. And I do back him to still get good minutes. I think maybe 140, 150 across the double. And therefore, I prefer Diaz over Darwin, who is someone that I think potentially we could be looking at maybe one rest out of the two matches, or maybe 30 minutes in one, 70 in the other, and maybe only looking at 100 to 120 minutes. And for me, I think I'm more comfortable with Diaz at this moment in time. Now, moving across to the other Diaz, Brereton Diaz, earlier on this week, I did talk about him briefly in one of my free hit drafts, and I did have him on the bench at the time. However, I've absorbed a lot of content since then. I've been talking to a lot of other people who are very, very into the free hit this week, and they are very hot on Brereton Diaz, and I think maybe I've either been brainwashed or I've come around to the light side and I now know the truth on Brereton Diaz. the data actually is really good. 0.53 XGI per 90 is really good, of course. And in 3 of his last 4 matches, it's been over 0.5 as well. So it's not just one match, it's not just one flash in the pan. The data is decent. But it goes beyond that as well. He's also very, very cheap, so he's easy to have in as a budget enabler. And I was briefly looking at having Elise as my other 5th midfielder, making it a Crystal Palace double up. And I was really tempted by that. But I don't have the money to push to him. But Brereton Diaz is someone I can easily afford and easily squeeze in to make the entire team better. And I think it's a sacrifice I'm willing to take. Also based on the fact that whilst I think West Ham and Newcastle at home are a fantastic double for Palace, Burnley and Man United are neither of them are good defences either. I think they're both very near the bottom of the table for the XGC2. And while Sheffield United are not a good attack by any means, we're not looking at them as a team. We're looking at one player. And Brereton Diaz actually is getting the data you'd expect from a pretty decent value for money midfielder. And against Burnley, against Man United, you expect them to get maybe 10, 12, 13 shots against both of them. If Brereton Diaz can get 4 or 5 per match, you kind of back him and his quality to get one of them in the net. And I think that's the gamble I'm taking, that he can return against pretty poor defences. Even if Sheffield United don't win the matches or get any points from them, I'm not really bothered by that. I'm only bothered by how many points he gets. And if he can get a goal or an assist in either of those matches, I'll be pretty happy with it. And he's getting good minutes, good data, out of position as a forward as well, by the way, which I don't think I'd mentioned. All of that comes together to make him pretty good value for money. And I think I'm actually pretty certain I'm going to end up picking him on my free hit, which honestly, a Sheffield United player on my free hit I never saw coming. And maybe I have been brainwashed. So let me know in the comments below what you think of that. But I do really like it now, and honestly, I can't see how I'm going to be put off of it at this point. So on to the final section, and that, of course, is the forward line. Let's start off with the obvious one, Dominic Solanke. I mentioned earlier on that he's a player that I would call a non-negotiable on a free hit for me this week. It might not be for you, but definitely is for me for a number of reasons. Number one, he is a 90-minute man more often than not. Unless it's an injury or unless they are like 4-0 up and they don't mind resting him for 10 minutes at the end, he usually gets 90 minutes. Not only that, the data is also very good at over 0.5 XGI per 90, and he's on penalties. So those 3 factors alone, I think, make him reasonable enough on the free hit. It's also a fact that, in my view, I don't actually back any of the other forwards to outdo him this week. I mean, you could look at maybe some of the single game weekers like Isak or Watkins, but across a double, I don't think Solanke's data is that much worse than either of theirs that I wouldn't back him to outdo them with 2 fixtures over them with 1. Now, obviously, it could happen that they do, and absolutely that is a world that could exist come Sunday or Monday, that they already have out-returned Solanke, but I think on probability, it's more likely than not that Solanke does all right across the double. Villa haven't looked too bad at the back recently, but without Kamara, they have looked weaker. And Wolves away from home, I think there are potentially goals in that fixture as well. I don't think they're the strongest defensively. So Solanke, talismanic, decent data, not a bad price, okay double. I'm very happy to have him on a free hit, and I don't think he's negotiable for me at this point unless we hear some sort of injury news. Now, maybe this one is a bit debatable. Erling Haaland is going to be my only single game weeker as it stands on my free hit, and I've seen a lot of chat one way or the other in the community this week, and I think it's dividing a lot of the community too. Erling Haaland for me, even against Brighton away from home, is a player that personally, one, I'm scared of going against. And I'm not afraid to admit that. I am afraid of him, but not to admit that. And Brighton have dropped off defensively recently quite badly, at least on the eye anyway. So City, again, I think they're 6 wins away from the title now. If they win them all, they're going to get it. I back him to get 90 minutes. I back him to be getting a lot of chances against Brighton's high press. So hopefully get him behind a fair few times. And even with 1 fixture, I still really like that as a fixture for him. And some of the other options I could put in instead of Haaland include Darwin Nunez, who I've already explained I'm happy enough with the triple up I've got. Maybe Matthias Cunha, but again, Arsenal at home being one of the fixtures, don't like that for attacking returns. And then also that would kind of cancel out my double clean sheet for Arsenal anyway, which, again, on a free hit, do you really want that sort of 50-50 call where you're not really ever going to get the upside? And then the other one is Mateta, who is on my bench at the moment, but I did a little bit of simple mathematics, which again is very, very basic. But with Mateta, his XGI per 90 is 0.39. Haaland's is 1.02. Now, even with Mateta's 2 fixtures, you double that and you're getting 0.78, something like that. Yes, his fixtures are good, and he might get, you're maybe expecting him to get slightly more than 0.78 across the 2 fixtures in terms of averages for XGI. But Erling Haaland's is still that much further ahead, and the fixture is still decent, that honestly, I just don't see a world where I'm not starting Erling Haaland on this free hit. And yes, it might not be maximising the upside, maybe it's a defensive move, but at the end of the day, I want the free hit side that scores the most points, not whether or not I go a bit different and try to force in 22 fixtures rather than one less for Erling Haaland. I do want the best scoring side, and genuinely, I do think Erling Haaland represents the best opportunity for that, even if some of the numbers, maybe on review, maybe in some of the data points you see online, don't reflect that. I personally think Haaland is close to a haul now, and I think all it's going to take is 1 or 2 moments, and all of a sudden he's up running again, and I think Brighton represents a really good opportunity for that. So I think I'm going to be going with Erling Haaland. And of course, if I didn't, and I went cheaper, maybe with Mateta starting, Cunha on the bench, or I figured out a way to put in Darwin instead, for example, then maybe I could look at upgrading Brereton Diaz to Elise, or maybe I could look at upgrading Van Dijk to Trent Alexander-Arnold, for instance. So maybe there are sacrifices I'm making by squeezing Haaland in that I'm not considering. And again, let me know in the comments below if you think I'm doing so. But I look at this side and I'm thinking, I do like the balance of this side, and there aren't many other strikers that I would favour putting in. And Trent, for me, I don't know if I put in ahead of Van Dijk at this point because of the minutes risk. I don't think Elise is that much better than Brereton Diaz, especially with the injury risk at the moment and the fact that he's just come back from the long layoff. I don't know if I can back him to get good minutes in both of the matches in the double. So overall, honestly, I'm looking at this side and I'm finding it really tough at the moment to pick out any one player and say, no, I need to swap him out for someone else with higher upside. But again, I am probably missing someone, so do feel free to leave a comment below for any players that you think I am missing out on an opportunity for, because as always, really interested to hear your thoughts. In the meantime, though, I hope you have enjoyed this video and enjoyed me setting myself up for the free hit in 34, and hopefully you've learned a little bit about what you might want to do this week as well. If you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, it would be greatly appreciated, as we're getting towards the end of the season now. I'd love to get to 1,500 subscribers before the end of the season. But in the meantime, good luck in Game Week 34, and I'll see you on the other side as we start preparing for Game Week 35.